when love hurts, it often reveals a truth we spend years avoiding. The pain is not always a sign that love has failed, but that we are being invited to grow beyond the limited version of ourselves we have been holding on to. There is a moment in every deep connection where affection collides with fear, where desire meets vulnerability, and where the instinct to protect ourselves fights against the longing to open up. This tension is the very place where people either retreat or transform. And the path toward transformation begins with asking a question most people never dare to confront. What if the moments that hurt the most are actually the moments showing us who we must become? Love, when felt deeply, strips away illusions. It forces us to face the parts of ourselves we usually keep hidden: insecurity, pride, impatience, the instinct to control, the fear of being abandoned, the fear of not being enough. When loving someone exposes these shadows, it is tempting to blame the connection, the other person, or the intensity of the feeling. But the deeper truth is that love exposes us so we can rise into a better version of ourselves. Pain becomes a mirror, and that mirror reflects not our failure but our potential. The path becomes clearer when we recognize that love is not only an emotion, but a catalyst for transformation. There is a kind of courage required when love begins to hurt. It is the courage to stay present, not because we enjoy the discomfort, but because we sense that something meaningful is happening beneath it. This subtle intuition is what keeps people from running away at the first sign of difficulty. It is what turns ordinary affection into something capable of reshaping who we are. And this raises a powerful line of inquiry. What would happen if, instead of withdrawing when love challenges us, we chose to lean in and understand the lesson behind the discomfort? This question stays in the mind because it demands a deeper engagement. It invites the viewer to look at their own experiences of love and consider what they may have misunderstood. Perhaps the hurt was never a sign to walk away, but an invitation to evolve. Perhaps the disappointment was actually a push toward emotional maturity. And perhaps the tension was simply the friction created when the person we want to be meets the person we currently are. These possibilities open a mental loop that keeps the listener wanting more clarity, more insight, more understanding of what love is truly capable of shaping. The transformative path of love becomes clearer when we realize that it often asks us to confront our instinct to self-protect. We crave closeness yet fear exposure. We want to be seen but dread judgment. We hope for loyalty yet hesitate to trust fully. This contradiction lies at the core of why loving deeply can hurt. The heart wants expansion, while the ego wants safety. The friction between these two forces is the birthplace of all emotional growing pains, and the only way through them is to allow the heart to lead. Loving through pain does not mean tolerating what damages us. It means understanding that discomfort often signals the start of inner change. It means recognizing that love requires honesty, responsibility, patience, self-awareness, and the willingness to rise above reactive impulses. It is in these moments of tension that we learn how to be gentle without being weak, strong without being controlling, committed without being afraid. When we lean into this kind of emotional maturity, love stops being a battlefield and becomes a process of refinement. The beauty of this path is that it reshapes us from the inside out. It turns passion into purpose, affection into understanding, connection into transformation. The hurt we feel becomes the very pressure that molds us into someone more capable of giving, receiving, and sustaining love. And as the viewer begins to reflect on these ideas, another curiosity emerges. If love can transform us this deeply, then what would our relationships look like if we embraced this growth instead of resisting it? This is the emotional threshold where the story shifts. It is the moment when we realize that love's purpose is not comfort, but evolution. And that evolution requires intention. When love begins to demand more of us than we expected, something powerful happens. We are confronted with the version of ourselves we have avoided becoming. Everyone carries emotional habits shaped by past wounds, disappointments, or fears, and these habits quietly influence how we love. Some people hide their vulnerability behind silence. Others defend themselves with impatience, sarcasm, distance, or pride. For many, The instinct is to protect the heart rather than expose it. Yet when love becomes sincere, deep, and meaningful, these defenses start to crack. And in that moment, we face an uncomfortable truth. We cannot love deeply while remaining unchanged. This initiates a subtle transformation that many resist. Love reveals how impulsive we can be when challenged, how fragile our patience becomes under pressure, how quickly fear turns into anger or withdrawal, how difficult it is to listen when our ego wants to speak louder. Love highlights the internal conflicts we try to ignore, and this confrontation becomes the birthplace of growth. What hurts is not love itself, but the friction between who we are and who we need to become to love well. This friction sparks curiosity because it forces us to examine our emotional foundations. Why do certain words trigger defensiveness? Why does vulnerability feel unsafe? Why do expectations feel heavier than they should? Why does being loved sometimes feel threatening? These questions pull the viewer further into reflection, opening a mental loop that encourages them to search for deeper meaning in their own emotional patterns. This exploration is not about guilt or self-blame, but about awareness. It is the first step toward understanding that becoming someone capable of sustaining deep love requires emotional reconstruction. As we grow through this reconstruction, we begin to notice the subtle shifts within ourselves. We start responding instead of reacting. We learn to observe our triggers instead of letting them dictate our behavior. We begin to understand that love thrives in presence, not perfection. The moments that once caused conflict now become opportunities to build trust. The emotions that once felt overwhelming now become signals guiding us toward clarity. And in this gradual process, we notice something remarkable. The hurt we once feared becomes the very catalyst strengthening our ability to love. But transformation is rarely linear. There are moments of doubt where we question whether we are capable of becoming better. Moments where the weight of past mistakes tries to pull us back into familiar patterns. Moments where the fear of losing someone we love pressures us into acting from insecurity instead of wisdom. These are emotional crossroads, and they are essential. They force us to make choices that define the kind of partner, lover, and human being we are becoming. The emotional climax of this transformation often happens in silence, in those private moments where we realize we can either repeat a destructive habit or rise above it. We recognize that love will not always give us comfort, but it will always demand honesty. It will ask us to communicate rather than shut down, to apologize rather than defend, to stay present rather than escape into distance or distraction. These choices, though small, shape the emotional integrity that love requires. As we lean into this new way of being, we discover that loving someone, even when it hurts, is not about sacrificing our identity. It is about refining it. We become more patient, not because the other person is perfect, but because we finally understand that love cannot grow in an environment of constant reaction. We become more gentle, not because we are weak, but because we recognize the power of calm. We become more attentive, not out of obligation, but because we now understand that presence is the oxygen of any meaningful connection. This inner evolution brings us to a simple yet profound realization. Love hurts not to break us, but to rebuild us. It teaches us emotional discipline, resilience, openness, and depth. It challenges our fears and amplifies our strengths. And as the viewer absorbs this understanding, a quiet curiosity emerges. If becoming better is the natural outcome of loving deeply, then how much more could we grow if we embrace this process fully? When we reach the point where love no longer feels effortless, we stand at a crossroads that determines the entire direction of a relationship. One path leads to avoidance, distance, and emotional stagnation. The other leads to understanding, vulnerability, and a deeper form of connection. The difference between these two paths is not defined by circumstances, but by who we choose to become when love tests us. This is the moment when we must decide whether we will act from fear or from growth, whether we will repeat old habits or embrace a higher level of emotional maturity. The truth is that every meaningful connection will eventually reveal the emotional structures we have built around ourselves. Some of these structures were formed long before the relationship began. The fear of abandonment, the instinct to hide our flaws, the desire to control outcomes, the reluctance to express needs, the habit of shutting down when overwhelmed. These patterns are not signs of failure. They are signs that we have reached the limits of the emotional tools we previously relied on. When love exposes these limitations, it is not punishing us, it is inviting us to evolve beyond them. This invitation sparks an internal shift that is both challenging and deeply transformative. We begin to see that loving well is a skill, not an instinct. It requires self-regulation, patience, curiosity, humility, and the willingness to stay open even when vulnerability feels uncomfortable. It demands that we examine not only how we treat the person we love, but how we treat ourselves. Because the truth is simple. The emotional quality we bring to love is the emotional quality we bring to life. And if we want to experience deeper love, we must first cultivate deeper self-awareness. This realization triggers one of the most powerful mental hooks, the understanding that we are not stuck with the emotional patterns we inherited or developed in the past. We can grow, we can change, we can learn to love differently. This possibility opens a space of hope, because it means the story is not fixed. It means that mistakes can become lessons, that fears can become strength, and that relationships can become environments where both people rise instead of retreat. As this transformation unfolds, we start to notice the profound difference between reacting from old wounds and responding from emotional presence. Arguments become opportunities for understanding rather than battles to be won. Vulnerability becomes a bridge instead of a threat. Love stops being a negotiation of needs and becomes a collaboration of growth. In this space, connection shifts from volatile to stable, from fragile to resilient, from conditional to expansive. The emotional climax of this process occurs when we understand that love does not ask us to sacrifice ourselves, but to integrate ourselves. It asks us to become someone capable of loving without losing identity, someone strong enough to be gentle, someone honest enough to admit mistakes, someone humble enough to grow, someone mature enough to sustain connection even when tension arises. This is where love stops hurting, not because challenges disappear, but because we have developed the internal strength to navigate them with clarity and depth. This shift in perspective changes everything. Instead of seeing conflict as a threat, we begin to see it as part of the rhythm of intimacy. Instead of interpreting emotional discomfort as a sign of incompatibility, we interpret it as a sign of evolution. And instead of fearing the intensity of our feelings, we learn to harness that intensity to strengthen the bond rather than weaken it. This is where passion deepens, where trust becomes stronger, where connection becomes more meaningful than ever before. As the viewer reaches this point in the journey, a powerful reflection emerges. What kind of person am I becoming through the way I love? The answer to this question shapes not only relationships, but character. It determines whether we build a life defined by fear or by growth. It reveals whether we will continue carrying old emotional wounds into new connections, or whether we will finally allow love to turn those wounds into wisdom. When love reaches its most challenging moments, the instinct to withdraw becomes powerful. Pain makes us want to protect ourselves, to hide behind emotional walls, to retreat into familiar patterns that feel safer than vulnerability. But when we pause long enough to observe what is truly happening inside us, we notice something important. The urge to run is not about the other person. It is about the parts of ourselves we have not yet learned to face. This realization is the turning point, the moment where growth becomes possible. Because love is not meant to break us, it is meant to reveal us. And what it reveals is the exact place where transformation is needed. We often imagine that healthy love should be easy, that connection should always feel warm, comforting, aligned. But real love goes deeper than comfort. It challenges the fears that limit us, the beliefs that hold us back, the emotional habits we have carried for years without questioning. It pushes us to confront our impatience, our insecurities, our need for control, our difficulty with trust, our fear of losing someone we care about. These confrontations can feel like pain, but they are actually moments of clarity. They show us the areas where we must grow if we want to build a love that lasts. This understanding opens a powerful mental loop. What if the difficulties we face in love are not signs of weakness, but signs of potential? What if the tension is not a warning to walk away, but an invitation to evolve? This shift in perspective transforms the entire experience of loving someone. Instead of seeing challenges as threats, we begin to see them as opportunities to strengthen the bond. Instead of interpreting emotional intensity as instability, we interpret it as depth. And instead of fearing vulnerability, we start to recognize it as the foundation of genuine intimacy. When we choose growth over fear, love begins to change shape. It becomes less about what we want to receive and more about what we want to contribute. It becomes less about proving ourselves and more about understanding ourselves. It becomes less about avoiding discomfort and more about using discomfort as a guide. This is when love develops maturity. This is when connection becomes stable. This is when passion becomes grounded in trust rather than insecurity. In this space, love stops being fragile and becomes something capable of enduring storms. The emotional climax of this journey comes when we finally accept that love's greatest purpose is transformation. It refines us, it teaches us discipline, patience, courage, emotional awareness. It pushes us to speak honestly, to listen with presence, to apologize without defensiveness, to forgive without resentment, to stay open even when the mind wants to shut down. These practices shape not only the relationship, but the person we become within it. They strengthen character. They build integrity. They turn affection into something meaningful and enduring. As we grow in this direction, love begins to feel different. Not because challenges disappear, but because we now face them with confidence instead of fear. We communicate instead of assuming. We connect instead of retreating. We show vulnerability instead of hiding behind pride. We choose understanding instead of judgment. And slowly, the relationship becomes a place where both people evolve, not through pressure, but through a shared commitment to becoming better. This leads us to the final reflection, one that echoes long after the conversation ends. Love hurts when it asks us to grow beyond who we have been. But if we welcome that growth, the hurt transforms into strength. It becomes the pressure that shapes us, the clarity that guides us, the force that turns passion into purpose. Loving deeply is not about avoiding pain. It is about using that pain to become someone more capable of giving and receiving love with depth, maturity, and truth. If this message resonates with you, consider subscribing to the channel. More reflections like this can help you understand yourself better, love more consciously, and build connections that bring out the best version of who you are meant to become.